Go ahead.
All right, thank you. Hello, everyone. Today is Wednesday, September 16th, and this is the Cluster API office hours. Cluster API is a subproject of SIG Cluster Lifecycle. Please follow the CNCF Code of Conduct. Make sure that you raise your hand if you want to speak and be kind to one another. If you're able to, can you please add your name to the attendee list on the document? I pasted the link in the chat. And if you have any discussion topics that you'd like to bring up, go ahead and add them with your name under the list. Looks like we have a few already. So we'll go ahead and get started. All right, so first off, PSAs. Fabrizio, you want to take this one?
Yeah, thank you. Hi, everyone. So yesterday we created, just to inform everyone that we created a new on-demand end-to-end job that you can use to run the full CAPI end-to-end test with. And in order to trigger this job, you should simply issue test pull cluster API end-to-end full. That's it.
Any questions for Fabrizio? All right, thanks for the heads up. So we'll move on to, I don't think we have any other PSAs. Vince, Andy, anything else? Oh.
Well, so 0310 is slated for the end of the month. There have been like a few PRs and memory leak that we found out, like with Andy and Fabrizio and Yassine. They have all been merged. There is one more PR that Andy is prepping to rewrite some parts of the cluster tracker, which is the code that actually looks at the workload clusters. So I just wanted to call that out. Like if you notice that like high memory usage or like a leak, we're on top of it and we're still targeting by the end of the month to do a full release. But we'll cut a beta tag maybe either by the end of the week or the start of next week.
Andy?
Could it be just an RC instead of a beta? I know it doesn't really make much of a difference, but RC makes more sense to me.
Sure. I mean, we're 2 weeks away, so.
Yeah. I did just get a request to edit this document. Please follow the instructions at the top of the document. Thank you.
Yeah, you can just click this link and add yourself to the mailing list. That's faster. All right, thanks, Andy. So I guess we'll move on to the discussion topics. And actually, I have the first one. So I don't know if James DePhillis is here, but we were talking in Slack. And there's this proposal, or not this proposal, but doc that was started by Nadir a while back about doing some bootstrap failure detection from the infrastructure providers. And we concluded that it was very hard to do this in a like cloud agnostic way, and that if we were going to use things like a daemon set or things like that, it wasn't going to work for nodes that weren't given the chance to join the cluster yet if things completely failed in Cloud Init. And the other thing is that we also want to make sure that whatever solution we get to is bootstrap provider agnostic, in the sense that it doesn't expect anything kubeadm specific. It doesn't rely on post kubeadm commands. And it also works with other like bootstrap mechanisms, not just Cloud Init. So given that, Jack from Microsoft, I don't know if he's here, Jack and I wrote a doc in CabZland to propose how we could do this with the Azure, like Azure specific like tools that we have available to us. And what conclusion we came to, and it seems like James also came to that same conclusion independently, is that we could really use from like a signal in the Bootstrap provider contract that tells us like Bootstrap is complete, and it's up to the Bootstrap provider to define what that means for that specific provider to be complete. But an easy way to do this would be to have something like a Sentinel file that is written on the machine or just touched like when the bootstrap process is complete, and then we can hand it off to the infrastructure from there, and the infrastructure, whatever way we decide to do this in the infrastructure provider, can go and look for that signal and use that to do things and set the status. So I guess the question is, are there any objections to, I mean, this would probably be a proposal for V1 Alpha 4, but it wouldn't be that big of a change to add the Sentinel file, but it would mean a change to the Bootstrap provider contract. So yeah, Yassine?
So in general, I would agree. It's going to be interesting though for providers that don't have a way to access the machines, because like I guess for example for CAPV we do have a way to access machines without having to SSH into them. I guess for Azure you must have something similar, but for providers that don't have any way to access machines either through API or something like that, would it require SSH access for them?
So when I say write the file, actually, I don't mean the Bootstrap provider being the one actually to write it, but it would give the instruction. So for example, for KubeADM Bootstrap provider, we would add like a command in the Cloud Init script that gets sent to the infra provider that includes the instruction to write that file after it's done doing all the other commands. So it wouldn't necessarily be the Bootstrap provider doing the SSH and like writing to the machine. It would just include that as part of the Bootstrap script. Andy?
Yeah, I think another way to interpret this, if I'm hearing it correctly, is that this is a contract change proposal for the Bootstrap providers, and the infrastructure provider or some other component potentially could read this Sentinel file and report on its status. It probably needs to be optional, and the SSHing or however it's accessed is done by the thing that cares about checking on the status.
Yes, exactly.
Would we want that to live in the cluster itself instead on the, so that there isn't this isn't external? It almost feels like it could be eventing on the Bootstrap provider to say these things are complete, and then the infrastructure providers could watch and wait on that. I don't know, just a thought. Sorry, coming in late.
Yeah, Andy?
So that's a really good idea, and I wish it were that easy. So the bootstrapping happens inside the system, so inside a virtual machine, a bare metal machine, whatever, and there is no universal way for code running in Cluster API to reach in and figure that out. And there's also no universal secure way to have the bootstrapping code that's running inside the system to communicate back with the management cluster to say, I'm done.
Yeah, and I also want to answer something that Lubomir said in the chat about infrastructure providers being able to do that today. We can't assume KubeADM in the infrastructure provider. So that's the whole point why it needs to be part of the contract. We can't run like KubeADM in it from the infrastructure provider side, because that would assume that we're using KubeADM for bootstrapping, which might not always be the case, if that makes sense. I assume,
Lubomir, you meant bootstrap providers.
Yeah, my bad. So I meant.
Oh, okay. That makes more sense. Yeah, so we can do this today. I guess it's just the point is we want it to be part of the contract so we can, have every bootstrap provider do this. It's very easy to do this today, actually, in terms of implementation. So yeah, just wanted to bring this up. If anyone has any thoughts they want to discuss with me after this, feel free to reach out. But otherwise, this will probably take the form of a follow-up issue. Yes, Vince?
Would we worth to kind of like start adding this to the provider that we have today and fall back if like we don't find the file? I mean, we could also like do a file in a trap to like say like this has failed, like so kind of flipping it. But then we will get some signal on how we would implement it before we write the cap, if that makes sense.
Yeah, we can do this. The problem is that if the file is not there, then you don't know if it's because the file wasn't written or if it's because it actually failed. And that the whole point is that you're going to say after a time, if you don't find that file, you're going to be able to say, okay, Bootstrap did not succeed. It didn't send me the signal I was expecting.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Like we could do it in a trap because I think that we're already using some sort of bash script, especially in the experimental retry join one, if I remember correctly. Nadir could confirm.
Yeah, like a trap exit sort of thing.
Yeah. So if we, that would be kind of more. Yeah.
We could do that. That would kind of like put like an artificial like exit code to Cloud Init, which it doesn't have right now. But the thing, my only concern with that, I guess, is that it might, you know, not work for every Bootstrap provider. I don't know if there would ever be a Bootstrap provider that's not able to do this. It kind of imposes the like trap exit on the Bootstrap provider, which is a bigger implementation detail than just writing a file on success.
Yeah.
But I guess, yeah.
We can think about it. I just wanted to point out, like, because it would be great to like see the different implementation that infrastructure provider will put in place. And if we have any, you know, shortcomings, or if some infrastructure provider cannot like absolutely do this, like we might have to think in like another way or something.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I'd love to like get at least like something there so we can start testing it or have a like prototype. Yeah.
Cool.
Okay, I'm gonna move on because we have a lot of other topics. I don't want to take too much time. Okay, so Zach, you have something for us if you're here.
Hi. Yep. So I don't know if I ever formally introduced myself to this community, but I'm Zach. I work at Microsoft, not alongside the CapZ folks that you might know more in the community, but I work with another team. And I think on the call we have Dinesh and we have Madan, and on PM we have David. And we've been working on a cluster API provider for Azure Stack HCI. Now, if you don't know what Azure Stack HCI is, we'll have David do a short presentation of it in a little bit. But yeah, we're happy to announce we're finally open sourcing our cluster API infrastructure provider. We've been working, I guess, around the seams of the community for the last couple months, maybe posting, you know, certain issues or, but not really fully, you know, contributing. But we'd love to now help out and just have our code out in the open and, you know, act as the other providers do. But yeah, so for questions about Azure Stack HCI, I'll now quickly get you to David, who has a short presentation about that, if you're curious.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Zach. Is it okay if I share my screen?
Yeah, how long is the presentation? Just
it's like 2 slides. It should be
okay. Yeah, that's
5 minutes maybe.
I think we have time for that. Let me just I think you need, can anyone share their screen, Vince, or?
Yeah, I just enabled it.
Okay, thanks. Go ahead, you should be able to.
Awesome. This should be the right one. Share. All right, can everyone see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, great. Yeah, so as Zach mentioned, I'd first like to start out, give a little bit of background on what is Azure Stack HCI. So Azure Stack HCI is a solution that basically bundles various Microsoft technologies for compute, storage, and network virtualization in an optimal way to deliver a HCI environment with kind of better performance and scalability that hopefully reduces costs of operating similar infrastructure that is using all these technologies in a less optimally configured way. It's most popular, but not limited to, certainly, to users and companies with IT teams that already have some level of familiarity and affinity with these technologies, but at the same time also have a desire to consolidate existing server infrastructure, maybe unlock easy access to some Azure cloud services, and perhaps refresh aging hardware. So this offering basically enables provisioning and bringing up Linux and Windows VMs, and it also runs a dedicated kind of Azure Stack HCI OS that is based off of Windows Server. And our motivation was to basically, just like many other infrastructures and environments, users are creating Kubernetes clusters on Azure Stack HCI to orchestrate their containerized applications. And we want to simplify and streamline the experience of managing the lifecycle of Kubernetes clusters on Azure Stack HCI environments via our own infrastructure provider. To give a little bit of background, I can probably just open this and basically this provider is V1 Alpha free aligned provider, and one of the interesting things, if let's say I go to show the templates.
We're only seeing your PowerPoint window.
Oh, I'm sorry. Try that again. Can you see my browser? Okay, great. Yeah, I just wanted to give an overview of one of the templates, YAMLs. Azure Stack HCI machines can be of different OS types like Linux or Windows. And we have been working closely together with SIG Windows community in Kubernetes, as well as the Windows operating system team to actually refine the bootstrapping procedure of Windows machines and ensure we're using the best recommended practices. So like a lot of testing and development went into getting this right. And we actually also have a first experimental attempt at a retry join procedure for Windows that we'd love to probably raise a feature request to see if it's possible to add this retry logic to the kubeadm bootstrap provider. And yeah, but we'd love to share basically all of our learnings that we did here and that we incorporated into this provider to help speed up Windows development efforts for other providers, especially since there's a proposal now on kind of how to provision workload clusters with Windows nodes. Share my screen. Okay, can you see my presentation again?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, so there's a getting started guide that we added and some docs. However, in the getting started guide, there's a placeholder right now to basically set up the Azure Stack HCI environment correctly. And there's basically some agents that still need to be published, and they will be published next week so that people can actually run this project. So I just wanted to mention that. It would be easier if I just open it here.
Very cool, thank you.
So just wanted to mention this in the getting started guide. There's a section here on setting up your Azure Stack HCI environment, and we still need to add basically a URL for how to set up the environment correctly. And the ETA for that would be next week. So any questions on anything I showed you today? So no, and I guess from my side, assuming this infrastructure provider adheres to the provider spec, follows the right conventions around naming, etc., what are the different layers of approval that it would need to go through to be maybe added to the list of infrastructure provider implementations in the cluster API book?
There is
Andy?
an.
Oh.
Who wants to talk? I cannot raise my hand, so.
Go ahead, Vince.
There isn't any approval. You can just open a PR for both here and Cluster Cuddle to kind of just like get included. And yeah, I guess like welcome.
Awesome. Thank you.
Fabrizio, did you want to add anything?
No, I was just saying open a PR and for getting immersed in the same as Vince.
Cool. Thank you.
Any other questions for David or Zach?
Yeah, I just wanted to say excited to be openly part of the community now, and thanks everyone for your hard work on the upstream side. So
Yeah, welcome. All right, let's move on then. Mike, autoscaler proposal.
Yeah. Hey, everybody. So a couple months ago, my colleague, Mike Gugino, opened this PR that I linked here, adding an enhancement for scale from 0. And we had some good discussion there, but I'm seeing an uptick in requests from the autoscaler side. People are kind of curious about when scale from 0 is coming, and they know we can do it. And so I'm curious if people might be willing to take another review on that. I think where we're stuck right now is that we need to decide how we're going to annotate the information about CPU, GPU, memory in a way that the autoscaler can get that information. I think Andy kind of helpfully pointed out there that that information is available now in the kubeadm, what's it called? The kubeadm config template. But there was some pushback about whether we wanted the autoscaler to have to dig that deep into the CAPI implementation to get this information. So, we noted that, the way we do this in OpenShift is we annotate the machine sets and machine deployments so the autoscaler could view that information, just at the machine set layer. But, that may not be appropriate for what we want to do here. And so I'm just curious if anybody has thoughts about this, and then, maybe how could we kind of push this forward to the next level? And there's one more issue too about taints as well. How a user could kind of have these taints available as well. That's another piece of information the autoscaler needs to know. So yeah, so like I'm curious to hear any thoughts, or if we don't need to spend a ton of time on this if people are willing to put their thoughts on the PR or whatever. But yeah, that's where I'm at.
Thanks. Andy, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I need to read through it again. I thought at one point we had talked, Mike, about possibly having the data, be it an annotation or whatever, get placed on the appropriate resource or resources after you had at least one instance. So like some component, be it the autoscaler or whatever, could go find an actual machine for the machine set and then figure out its characteristics and save that information as an annotation or whatever on the machine deployment or machine set. And then the autoscaler could use that. I think the only case that doesn't work with is if you start with 0 replicas on your machine deployment. There's no way to get that information there unless you manually put it there or have some tie-in with an infrastructure provider that knows what it needs to do and where to put that information.
Yeah, I think you had had that comment in the PR, and you also mentioned too about there was no answer to this, but kind of the infrastructure provider should be creating this information based on the type of machines that you're requesting. So I think, I'm totally happy to have it done that way. If each infra provider can put this information when it sees like, a machine set or a machine deployment, it knows what type of machine you're trying to create. so that presumably at that point, when it reconciled the set or the deployment, it would be able to add that information, back as an annotation. I'm happy to pursue that direction if we want to go that way. And, I guess I can just take the initiative of looking into the code and then updating the PR.
Yeah, I think if we think about it from a contract perspective, and also think about it from the V1 Alpha 4 perspective, where hopefully we can add more spec fields where needed instead of using annotations, that would be helpful. Because if we say contractually, optionally, all infrastructure providers may fill in fields X, Y, and Z with this particular information to help the autoscaler, like getting that written down in our contracts would be useful.
Right. And that's kind of like the contract that your provider then does support, like scaling to and from 0. All right, this is good. I guess the next action for me then is I'll go back and kind of look at the infrastructure providers and see if maybe I can answer some of these questions. But if we're cool with adding information to the machine set or machine deployment, then that's at least a way forward.
We have one hand raised, Hardik.
Yes, so I haven't gone through the complete proposal, but for both of the points, so I think it would be very, very convenient if we have this information on the machine deployment rather than the KVM config part. And second part about fetching the instance details. So basically what I understand from the experience is that it basically requires for each instance how much allocatable CPU will be there and how much allocatable memory and GPU support, right? So I see in Autoscaler already all the providers already have the script which generates one file which has all the VM instance types and necessary details in it. So either we can reuse that or should probably be okay if we can simply import in our provider and maintain it there. The reason I think the reason it is being done this way is probably it's not easy to fetch such information at runtime for all the providers.
No, you're exactly correct, Hardik. That's the reason why the other providers in the autoscaler like encode these as tables basically that they look up. I think my understanding of best practice in the autoscaler is that we probably shouldn't be looking into other providers' information to inform what we're doing. We should be, our providers should be bubbling that information back up through the API objects to the autoscaler. So I have a feeling that I haven't looked at all the providers, but I have a feeling that we might have some of these tables in our providers already to do these lookups about what the type of machine is. So yeah, we wouldn't be querying the cloud API at runtime. This information should already exist once the provider is running.
Vince?
Yeah, I had a question, like, do you have strong opinions to use annotations versus like either spec or status in Alpha 4? I'm asking this because annotations are usually hard to be versioned and like dealt with conversion webhooks. And I would strongly prefer to like have something on status or spec instead, if possible.
Yeah, I mean, I know this can be a contentious topic. I do not happen to have a strong opinion one way or the other. I know there are strong opinions about whether we should be using annotations or not. As I mentioned before, in OpenShift, we chose to use annotations because they're easy to add on. But I think it would be perfectly acceptable for us just to update our CRDs to contain this information, so that we can have proper 0 values and validation and everything. And then at the autoscaler side, it'll just be easy. We'll just have a reference into the API and, we can just pull this information out. I'd be happy to do it with CRDs unless there's a really strong objection to it. And I realize Mike isn't here and I don't know what his thoughts are on this. So I'll have to kind of follow up with him a little bit too.
Okay, perfect. Sorry.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Vince, if you wanted to add something.
I just wanted to, I can work you on the, I guess the main question was like, do you want this for Alpha 3 or is it fine to wait for Alpha 4?
I mean, I think it's fine to do it for Alpha 4. This is probably going to take a little while to complete. that said, I think right now the sticking point is just getting this information exposed on the CAPI side. I already have a patch ready to go that like consumes the information from the autoscaler side. So, once we kind of unblock this here, then we'll be ready to go. But we could certainly slate it to V1 Alpha 4, and then we could get it in the CRD and everything. That'd be fine with me.
Yassine, did you want to add something?
Yeah, it was just to echo what Vince said. Generally, labels and annotations are pretty hard to version. I think there are some examples in Kubernetes itself for Arch and OSs and things like that. So yeah.
Okay, so just to repeat kind of what I'm hearing here, I'll explore kind of doing this as a CRD change. We'll add these fields somewhere. I guess we'll figure that out in the review probably. And I need to do a little research too. But so if everyone's cool with adding it to the CRD for V1 Alpha 4, I'll explore that and just see if I can get the PR updated, and then I don't know, maybe start to put forth some patches to kind of see how it works.
All right, let's move on to the Windows CAP PR. James?
Hi, I just wanted to call attention that I opened up the PR. There's quite a few comments on the Google Doc. I think I addressed quite a few of them, but if you please take a look at the PR. There hasn't been a whole lot of movement on it since I opened it up last week, but please take a look. So since we now have an infrastructure provider that has some Windows support, look forward to your comments on that as well. I've been in touch with them, and so been sharing some of the feedback with them, and yeah, looking forward to figuring out what the next steps are and getting a few comments on the PR. I guess the other thing I mentioned is I've also started to work on the image builder image for in the scripts that would set up the Windows image. So hopefully have something open up for that maybe next week.
Sounds good. Thanks for the reminder. I myself need to go and take a look at it. Do we want to set up a lazy consensus timeline like we have for other PR proposals, or is it too early for that? How do you feel about it, James?
I think that's a way to move things forward, but I'm open to the way the community does things.
Okay. You know what? Let's just give people until like next office hours, like next Wednesday, and then if by then there hasn't been much movement, we'll maybe set a lazy consensus date. How's that? Any objections? Cool.
So when
All right.
did you do 2 weeks?
Like no, I just meant like until next week, next Wednesday, and then like just to like leave it open, and then next Wednesday we'll set the date depending on how many comments.
Yeah. Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
Cool. All right. Brian with a demo.
Yeah. Hi. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
Can I share my screen?
You can. Go ahead.
The button moved. Okay, what's happening? Okay. So I made a couple of slides. I'll go very quickly. Basically, I started here with all these diagrams in the Cluster API book, and there's all these like 4 different controllers talking to each other, and I didn't really understand what was going on. So I thought maybe I can put this into tracing, and I use Jaeger, so maybe I can put it into Jaeger. I have read through these, which are prior art. So what I'm hoping will work when I show you it is I have added a little bit of code to each of the 4 controller. This is the diagram out of the book, the architecture diagram on the right. And I've done it in the Docker provider for ease of demoing. So they split stuff into a collector, and that puts stuff on the screen. So now I'm going to change window because I couldn't figure out how to share my whole screen. So now I am in Visual Studio Code, and yeah, okay. So I'm going to run clusterctl to configure a cluster, just a one node cluster to avoid tempting fate. I ran it earlier and I captured that stuff in a file so I could look at it in a second. But right now I'm just going to YOLO. We have, you know, a machine that's being provisioned, and we could go look at the logs or whatever, but oh hey, I have to change window again. Did not practice this in a mode where I can't change window easily. Anyway, let's go over here to Jaeger and say, what have you got? Jaeger has captured stuff from all these different processes. And if you're not familiar with Jaeger, basically there's like a zoomed out view here and a zoomed in view here. And what we can see is clusterctl kicked off an operation, and then all the other controllers kind of reacted to that. They started doing their thing, which is mostly reconciling. And if we look down a bit, the capd controller is creating a machine. Now this is not kind of streaming, so I need to refresh just to see if things have moved on a little bit. But anyway, so this is the machine being created by the capd controller, and you know, that's pretty much the high level. I can talk for another 3 hours on this subject, so why don't you tell me what you want to know?
All right, who has the question?
While you're thinking of questions, let me just point out a couple more things. So the let's see. So the machine itself was created by the control plane, and I've logged the various Kubernetes API operations that happen inside the controller. So it created an object, and that then kicked off the next. Well, hang on, probably not that one. Anyway, creating an object kind of passes the context through to the next step in the process. And what else is interesting? Right down here, when we're actually executing the commands, I logged them out as well, so you can see the kubeadm init comes out. So I did this because I personally was uncertain what was going on inside my provider and the CAPI upstream providers and so on. They're all kind of talking to each other and making changes and so on. I do think it could be useful for lots of different things, for kind of figuring out, like someone mentioned performance in Slack, but just like, you know, why is it not working kind of questions. Do you want to see how this is done in the code?
Yeah, my question was going to be what kind of work was done to instrument like the infrastructure provider.
Okay, let's do the window change shuffle again.
Sorry, I didn't raise my hand according to protocol.
I'm sorry?
No problem.
Oh, yeah, you're right. So let's take a look. See if I know how to do this. So basically, what I've done is I've hooked in a couple of places. I used Jaeger. I'm familiar with Jaeger, but this could be anything in that vein. So basically, in all of the main programs, we have to kind of kick the thing off and tell it who's talking. And then the next thing we have to do is figure out where we are, and in particular, this context flowing through the objects. So the basically in every reconcile routine, there's one of these where we pick up a tracing span from inside the object, and that's a technique that was in one of those keps that the kep that I flashed up the URL to earlier. And then we generally log a couple of things, but that's pretty much it. Let me go back to the main program. So the other cool thing that happens is we wrap the runtime client, where this is the new manager. We're setting up the manager for the runtime controller, and we have a function already in this controller. But what I did was I wrapped that. So let's take a look at that code. And basically, this is where, if I scroll down, this is where all the logging of get, list, create, and so forth is going on. And also where anytime we create an object, we add that annotation to it. So that gets us the flow through the layers. That's basically it.
Oh, so you actually put a trace ID on the object, and that's how they. Okay.
Let's take a look at that file I saved earlier. That's what this looks like. It's kind of ugly, but it's in good company in the metadata section of a Kubernetes YAML. So this is this is the binary format of a Jaeger trace context. You don't need to understand that. It's an annotation, which we love. Yeah, the code is kind of attaching, including clusterctl. I put the same thing in there to kind of kick it off. And then as it goes down through the controllers, every time it creates an object, annotations are added, or one annotation, the span context.
You said that you did this to get a better idea of how the controllers interact with each other and like all of that. Do you feel like that helped you get that? Or because I feel like this is really useful for performance and like detailed tracing, but did you also get like a good view of like the different interactions and overall?
Yeah, I fixed like numerous bugs in our own CAPI. I didn't actually introduce myself particularly. I work for Weaveworks, and so we have what we call the existing infrastructure provider, and yeah, I mean, it was actually failing in a couple of different ways that I didn't realize until I kind of looked at what was going on in the traces. Oh, this guy expects me to put a value here. So yes, very much. Right. So what do I want? Why am I doing this? Why am I telling you all this? So number one is suggestions for what to do next. And the other, number two, is ideally some of this would go upstream into controller runtime libraries. So I'm looking for support that should be done.
Lubomir?
Probably the cluster API maintainers are going to recommend the so-called KAIP, which is the cluster API proposals. In terms, I had a separate question. That did you manage to benchmark the overhead of the tracing itself?
Well, formally, no. I mean, that's been done. I guess basically, if you well, there's two kind of levels to this question. If you don't turn it on, like if you never wanted tracing, then it's going to go through code like this, where we do a little bit of kind of lookup of metadata and so on. So there's a little bit of extra, basically string manipulation, type manipulation going on there, which is then discarded because we're not tracing. And then if you do turn on tracing, then what's happening is every span is going into a UDP packet and being fired out to a local collector. So I'm confident in saying that the overheads are very low, but they're clearly not zero. I mean, in context, there's a shit ton of other, you know, type manipulation and string manipulation and so on going on. There's objects being converted into objects, into JSON, into YAML. It's, you know, I don't think it's going to show up.
Yeah, it could be minimal. That's what you're saying. Yeah. Thanks.
It's probably like not a use case where you would want to sample either, because like this is not a high traffic web service. The
right.
controllers are dealing with a small number of objects, so you could probably get all of the data, and that's pretty high value.
Yeah, but typically that sampling is deferred to something in the infrastructure that understands, you know, what you want to look at. So, you know, it can be adaptive. It can be, if you did have that problem, that can be solved in the tracing infrastructure. It doesn't have to be solved in the code here.
Any other questions, thoughts, comments?
Yeah, this is just really cool. Thanks for sharing.
Thank you.
Been really wanting to see like traces inside of Kubernetes native controllers, and the fact that you're putting trace IDs through the API objects and that gets picked up by other controllers is pretty innovative.
Yeah, I repeat that's taken from an existing KEP. Let me maybe put that slide on the screen. So the annotation is described in this KEP and implemented in this one, which is a mutating admission controller, which I did not use. I did the hooking in the code as the object is created. Again, I could talk about that for an hour. But the ideas basically come from here, and what I did was I implemented it for CAPI, because this implementation was done for scheduling and creating pods and so on. Hasn't been done before for CAPI.
What do you think your next steps are?
Well, yeah, I guess I'll probably write a cape and get some more feedback on that. I think the sort of utility code, I'll probably make a PR into controller runtime for that, because it's usable even if it doesn't go anywhere by default. And there's kind of harder things. I mean, I made a slide. Both the events would be quite cool to pick up in the timeline, as in the event recorder API, and the log messages that are already being logged by the controllers, and neither of those take a context. So it's basically impossible in Go to hook them into the tracing spans. So that's a slightly bigger exercise to campaign to get. I mean, the event API is kind of obvious that it can take a context and no one's going to die, but logging might be a harder battle. Oh yeah, and then, but I'm not going to change screen again. So the bit where you come in the top of the reconcile routine, and basically every bit of code that's copy and pasted from the same place says context equals context.background. That should really hook in from the infrastructure. We shouldn't we should start with a context that has the right span, ideally. And so that's another next step to figure out if I can do that.
Sounds good. I just want to give enough time to Fabrizio to talk about the cluster kettle operator. So
Sure.
let's move on if you don't mind. All right, I'll share again. Okay, Fabrizio, you want to give us some updates?
Thank you. So on Monday, we had the kickoff meeting for the management cluster operator. Thank you for all the participants and for the great discussion. The notes are below in this document, and I'm going to post the recording. Sorry for the delay. The main decision that we took during this meeting is that in scope for the management cluster operator are cert manager, providers, and all the configs that are required to install providers. While out of scope are cluster templates and as a consequence also the move operation. So at least for the first initial spike that we want to do. The next steps are to formalize goals in a document, in a KIPE, and we should start relying on a API that basically describe the object in charge for the operator. So that's all.
Thanks. Any questions about the operator or the discussion? Actually, I have one. Did you consider putting the cluster resource set in scope for that, or was there any discussion about that in the meeting? I haven't watched the recording yet.
No, we did not consider, because at least in my opinion, cluster resource set are part of what is included in the cluster template. So for me, it is out of scope.
What about the config map for the actual add-on definition, for example, for CNI?
Yeah, but what kind of operation do you expect that the operator should do on these things?
Okay, we should talk about that, because I was talking with Sadaf yesterday, and we were thinking, my impression was also that the cluster resource set should be part of the cluster template and that you'd have one per workload cluster. But actually, it seems like it's not necessarily like that, and you should maybe have one cluster resource set that you apply to your management cluster, and then that can be reused by multiple workload clusters. So you're like the infrastructure templates that are part of like infrastructure provider releases in the flavors don't necessarily have cluster resource sets in them. And so right now that would require like an additional manual step from the user to go and apply that cluster resource sets before they create the clusters to the management cluster. So that's why I was thinking that might be a good use case for the cluster kettle, for cluster kettle in general, and for the operator, so that you can have that cluster resource set, or those cluster resource set, if you have multiple, be like part of the management cluster lifecycle.
Yeah, we can take this offline. My initial reaction is that since for this, let me say, shared cluster resource set, you only need to apply, but then there is no other maintenance that you have to do on this thing. So it's basically nothing that should be operated. It's something that you should apply. But let's take this offline and see if we have a shared understanding of the use case.
Okay, sounds good. All right. Any other questions for Fabrizio? All right, I don't see any hands raised. Sorry, I didn't see if you added a topic. We have 2 minutes if you want to take that really quickly. KCP remediation.
Yeah, sure. We are trying to resume our work on KCP remediation and hoping to have some basic remediation logic, at least some part of it in 3.10 release. To that end, we are planning to add more conditions in both KCP and machines for just visibility purposes to see what is going on in control plane machines. After that PR is in, we will resume the work on KCP remediation. I'll add the PR that is open, that was closed before. That's all.
Great, thank you for sharing. Any questions on that? All right, if not, I think that's it for today. This was a really, really interesting and full meeting. Thank you all for participating. Thanks for all the demos and everything. Super exciting to see. And we'll see you all online and next week. Have a great one.